Sometimes it takes a single glance across a crowded restaurant to rewrite your entire world. He was a billionaire tech mogul who had everything money could buy, except the one thing that mattered most. She was a woman who had vanished into the shadows of her own fears, leaving behind a love she thought was too beautiful to last. But when his 7-year-old daughter looked across the dimly lit bistro and whispered 4 words that would shatter his carefully constructed walls, fate served them more than dinner. It served them a second chance at forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ethan Green had learned to measure time not in boardroom meetings or stock market fluctuations, but in the small rituals that made his daughter smile. Tonight, that meant reserving their usual corner table at Meridian Bistro Table 7, with the perfect view of the kitchen's dancing flames and far enough from the jazz quartet that 7-year-old Lily could chatter without disturbing other diners. The Mater D. Jeffrey greeted them with the practiced warmth of someone who had watched this particular father-daughter duo evolve from awkward takeout orders to their current Tuesday evening tradition. "Good evening, Mr. Green. Miss Lily, your usual table is ready." Lily bounced on her toes, her auburn curls catching the amber light from the vintage Edison bulbs. She wore a navy dress with small white flowers, her fancy restaurant dress, as she called it, and clutched a small notebook filled with questions she'd prepared throughout the week, specifically for their dinner conversations. "Jeffrey," she beamed, waving with both hands, "did you know that octopuses have 3 hearts? I learned that in school today, and I thought you should know because you're very smart about everything." The older man chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I did not know that, Miss Lily. Thank you for making me smarter." He turned to Ethan. "She gets more brilliant every week." Ethan smiled, that genuine smile reserved exclusively for moments involving his daughter. "She keeps me on my toes." He ruffled Lily's hair gently. "Come on, little professor. Let's see what culinary adventures await us tonight." As they settled into their booth, Ethan couldn't help but marvel at how this simple routine had become the anchor of his week. 3 years ago, he'd been pulling 18-hour days, building his tech empire with the ruthless efficiency that had made him one of Silicon Valley's youngest billionaires. His assistant had scheduled every minute of his life, including meals, which were usually protein bars consumed between conference calls. Then Lily came into his life permanently, not through the typical channels of family planning, but through a late-night phone call that changed everything. His sister's car accident had been sudden, devastating, and had left him as the sole guardian of a 4-year-old who barely knew him. The uncle who sent birthday cards from across the country had suddenly become Daddy Ethan, and later, simply Daddy. The transition hadn't been smooth. Those first months were a masterclass in humility for a man accustomed to controlling every variable. Lily had nightmares. She refused to eat anything green. She asked for her mommy 50 times a day, and Ethan fumbled through responses that felt inadequate and hollow. He'd hired the best nannies money could buy, enrolled her in the most prestigious schools, bought educational toys that child development experts swore would optimize her cognitive growth, but none of that had mattered as much as the evening she'd crawled into his lap during a particularly difficult bedtime and asked, "Daddy, why do you always look so sad when you think I'm not watching?" That question had broken something open in him. He'd realized he'd been trying to parent the same way he ran his company, with systems and strategies and measurable outcomes. But Lily didn't need a CEO. She needed someone who would sit on the floor and build blanket forts. Someone who would let her paint his nails during pretend spa days. Someone who would take her to restaurants and let her order chocolate chip pancakes for dinner, because sometimes, she reasoned with 4-year-old logic, breakfast food tastes better when the sun is sleeping. So he'd restructured his entire life. Delegated more to his capable team. Learned to say no to late meetings and weekend conferences. discovered that some of his best business ideas came to him while pushing Lily on swings or reading her stories about brave princesses and talking animals. Meridian Bistro had become their special place 6 months ago, after Lily had declared that fancy restaurants make conversations more important. She'd been right, as she often was. Their Tuesday dinners had evolved into a sacred space where they talked about everything: her day at school, his work simplified into terms a 7-year-old could grasp, her dreams, his hopes, the big questions about life that children ask with startling clarity. "Daddy," Lily said, opening her notebook with serious concentration, "I have 5 questions for tonight." "Only 5?" Ethan teased, signaling their server. "That's practically a slow week for you." "Well, 6, but the 6th. One is more of a wondering than a question." She consulted her list, written in careful block letters with occasional backwards letters that reminded him she was still so young. Question 1. If you could have any superpower, but you could only use it to help other people, what would it be? Ethan considered this carefully. Lily's questions always deserved thoughtful answers. "I think the ability to know exactly what someone needs to feel better when they're sad or scared." "That's a very daddy answer," Lily said approvingly. Question 2. Do you think Mr. Peterson's cat really can predict the weather, or is he just a very lucky guesser? Their server approached Maria, who had been taking care of their table since they'd started coming here. She knew to bring Lily apple juice in a wine glass, because it makes me feel sophisticated, and to give them extra time with the menu, even though they both usually ordered the same things. "Good evening, you two," Maria said warmly. "Let me guess chicken tenders and sweet potato fries for the young lady, and the salmon with risotto for Dad." "Actually," Lily said, closing her notebook momentarily, "I'm thinking about being adventurous tonight. What do grown-ups order when they want to try something new?" Maria exchanged an amused glance with Ethan. "Well, the chef has a special pasta tonight, penne with roasted vegetables and a light cream sauce. Very sophisticated, but not too scary." "Perfect," Lily declared. "I'll have the sophisticated pasta. And Daddy, you should try something new too. We're both being brave tonight." Ethan found himself agreeing to the duck breast, a dish he'd never normally order, marveling once again at his daughter's ability to push him gently out of his comfort zones. As Maria walked away with their orders, he realized this was what he'd been missing during all those years of building his empire: the simple joy of sharing a meal with someone who saw adventure in trying new pasta. "Now," Lily said, returning to her notebook, "question 3 is about something I noticed at school today, ... As she launched into a detailed observation about playground dynamics, Ethan felt that familiar wash of gratitude. 3 years ago, he'd measured success in quarterly earnings and market share. Now he measured it in moments like these, in his daughter's laugh, in her curiosity, in the way she made him see the world through eyes unclouded by cynicism or calculation. He had everything money could buy, it was true. But more importantly, he had this: Tuesday evenings with his brilliant, brave, beautiful daughter, who asked impossible questions and made ordinary moments feel like miracles. He had no idea that in approximately 12 minutes, one of those impossible questions would lead to the most extraordinary moment of his life. "Question 4, Lily announced, turning to a fresh page in her notebook, "is about something I've been thinking about all week." She paused, chewing thoughtfully on her lower lip, a habit she'd inherited from someone, though Ethan had never been able to figure out from whom. "Do you think people can recognize other people, even if they've never met them before?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the philosophical direction of her inquiry. "That's a deep question, Lil. What made you think about that?" "Well," she said, settling back against the booth's burgundy leather, "yesterday at the library, Mrs. Henderson said I reminded her of someone she used to know, but she couldn't remember who. And then today, Tommy Chun said his new babysitter looked exactly like his cousin from Portland, but it wasn't her. So I started wondering if maybe people have ... patterns. Like, maybe some people just look like other people, or maybe we recognize something deeper. The sophistication of her reasoning never ceased to amaze him. At 7, Lily possessed an emotional intelligence that had taken him decades to develop. I think, Ethan said carefully, that sometimes we recognize something in people that goes beyond just how they look. Maybe it's their energy, or their kindness, or the way they move through the world. Like soul recognition? Lily asked, her eyes lighting up. I read about that in one of Grammy's old books. Before Ethan could respond to this latest evidence of his daughter's voracious reading habits, Maria appeared with their appetizers calamari for him, a fruit and cheese plate for Lily. The restaurant had grown busier as the evening progressed, filling with the typical Tuesday crowd of business dinners, date nights, and small celebrations. Question 5, Lily continued, spearing a grape with delicate precision, is about whether you ever feel like something important is about to happen, even when everything looks normal. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Ethan paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. Do you feel like that now? Lily tilted her head, considering. Sometimes I get this feeling like when you're reading a really good book and you can tell the exciting part is coming, but you don't know what it's going to be yet. She gestured around the restaurant. Tonight feels like that kind of night. As if summoned by her words, a small commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A woman had just walked in, and she seemed to be having a quiet but intense conversation with Jeffrey at the host stand. From their corner table, Ethan could see her profile elegant neck, dark hair pulled back in a simple but sophisticated style, wearing a charcoal gray coat that suggested both professionalism and understated wealth. Table for one, they heard her say, her voice carrying a slight tremor that suggested this wasn't a planned dinner, but rather an escape or a refuge. Jeffrey consulted his reservation book, clearly trying to accommodate the unexpected guest. I'm afraid we're quite busy this evening, miss. We might have something available at the bar, or perhaps you'd prefer to wait for. The bar is fine, the woman said quickly. I just ... I need somewhere quiet for a little while. There was something in her voice, a vulnerability barely contained beneath a composed exterior, that made Ethan glance up from his calamari. The woman was being led to a high-top table near the bar area, partially obscured by an ornate pillar but still visible from their booth. Daddy, Lily whispered, her notebook forgotten. That lady looks sad. Sometimes people come to restaurants when they need to think, Ethan said gently. It's okay to eat alone. But Lily wasn't listening to his explanation. She was studying the woman with the intense focus she usually reserved for particularly challenging puzzles or especially interesting insects. Her small brow furrowed in concentration, and Ethan could practically see the wheels turning in her remarkable mind. The woman had removed her coat, revealing a simple black dress and delicate silver jewelry. She sat with her back straight but her shoulders slightly curved inward, the posture of someone trying to make herself smaller. When the bartender approached, she ordered something, they couldn't hear what, and then sat staring at her hands, occasionally glancing around the restaurant as if she were looking for something she couldn't name. She's pretty, Lily observed. Quietly, but not happy pretty, worried pretty. Ethan found himself studying the woman more closely, though he couldn't have said why. There was something familiar about her profile, something that tugged at the edges of his memory, like a song he'd heard years ago but couldn't quite place. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the angle of her chin when she lifted her head to look around the room. Maybe she's waiting for someone, he suggested, trying to redirect Lily's attention back to their dinner conversation. No, Lily said with startling certainty. She's not waiting, she's She paused, searching for the right word. She's remembering. Before Ethan could ask what she meant by that, their entrees arrived. The duck breast was perfectly prepared. The sophisticated pasta lived up to its billing. And for a few minutes they focused on their meal. But Ethan noticed that Lily kept glancing toward the bar area, her expression growing more thoughtful with each stolen look. "Question 6, she finally said, setting down her fork with unusual deliberation, "is the wondering question I mentioned." "Okay," Ethan said, curious about what had captured his daughter's attention so completely. Lily turned in her seat, looking directly toward the woman at the bar. The angle gave her a clearer view than Ethan had from his position. For a long moment, she simply stared, her expression cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that looked almost like wonder. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, but crystal clear in its certainty, she said 4 words that would change everything. "Look at her, Daddy." It wasn't a casual observation. It wasn't the idle comment of a young person noticing something interesting. It was a statement loaded with meaning that Lily herself probably didn't fully understand, a recognition that went beyond logic and straight to some deeper place of knowing. Ethan followed his daughter's gaze, shifting in his seat to get a better view of the woman who had captured Lily's attention so completely. And in that moment, as the woman turned slightly toward the window and the light caught her face at just the right angle, Ethan felt his world tilt off its axis. The fork in his hand clattered to the plate. The ambient noise of the restaurant faded to nothing. His carefully constructed composure, the armor he'd built around his heart over years of boardroom battles and personal losses, cracked wide open. Because sitting at that bar, looking lost and beautiful and achingly familiar, was the woman he'd spent the last 8 years trying to forget. Charlotte Evans, the love of his life. The woman who had disappeared from his world without explanation or goodbye, leaving behind only questions and a pain so profound it had taken him years to learn to breathe around it. She was here, in their restaurant, on their Tuesday, looking exactly like the woman who had haunted his dreams and informed every relationship he'd attempted since. "Daddy?" Lily's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Do you know her?" Ethan opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His mind raced through 1,000 memories, Charlotte's laugh echoing through his old apartment, her hand in his as they walked through Golden Gate Park, the way she looked when she thought he wasn't watching, the morning he woke up to find her gone and his life forever changed. He started, then stopped. How could he possibly explain to his 7-year-old daughter that the woman she'd somehow recognized was the reason he'd stopped believing in happily ever after? How could he tell her that once upon a time he'd planned to marry that woman, to build a life with her, to have a family that would have included ... His breath caught. A new, impossible thought began to form in his mind as he looked from Charlotte to Lily and back again. The timing. The resemblance that Lily had somehow sensed before he'd even seen it clearly. No, it couldn't be. But, as Charlotte turned fully toward their section of the restaurant, scanning the room with eyes that looked exactly like the ones that stared back at him every morning from his daughter's face, Ethan realized that sometimes the impossible was just the truth waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Time moved differently in moments of crisis. Ethan had learned this during his first major business presentation, when 30 seconds had felt like 30 minutes, and later during those terrifying early days with Lily, when her fever-induced hospital stay had stretched each minute into an eternity. Now, sitting in Meridian Bistro with his carefully ordered world crumbling around him, he experienced that same temporal distortion. Charlotte hadn't seen them yet. She was still scanning the room, but her gaze moved methodically from table to table, the way someone might search a crowd for a familiar face, or perhaps the way someone might try to ground themselves by cataloging their surroundings when the world felt unstable. "Daddy?" Lily's voice cut through his paralysis. "You look like you've seen a ghost." The accuracy of her observation was startling. He felt haunted, suspended between past and present, between the man he'd been 8 years ago and the father he'd become since. Charlotte represented the before, a time when his biggest concern was which startup to invest in next, when his heart was whole and his future seemed written in permanent ink. "I'm okay, sweetheart," he managed, though his voice sounded foreign to his own ears. "I just ... I think I recognize someone." Lily followed his gaze back to Charlotte, studying her with that intense focus that had become her trademark. "She has sad eyes," she observed, "but familiar sad eyes. Like ... She paused, her brow furrowing in concentration. "Like looking in. A mirror that shows feelings instead of faces." The sophistication of her metaphor would have impressed him under normal circumstances. Tonight, it sent a chill down his spine. How could a 7-year-old articulate something so complex, so unnaturally perceptive? Unless ... He forced himself to really look at his daughter, not with the daily familiarity of 3 years of shared breakfasts and bedtime stories, but with the objective eye of someone seeing her for the first time. The auburn hair that caught light the same way Charlotte's had. The delicate arch of her eyebrows. The way she tilted her head when thinking, a gesture he'd always attributed to curiosity, but now recognized as something much more specific. The math was impossible to ignore. Lily had come to him as a 4-year-old after his sister's accident. If Charlotte had left 8 years ago and never contacted him again, if she'd been pregnant when she disappeared. "Daddy, why are your hands shaking?" Lily asked, reaching across the table to touch his fingers with her small ones. He hadn't realized he was shaking. The revelation still forming, still too enormous to fully accept, was affecting him physically. His heart raced like he'd just finished a marathon. His mouth felt dry despite the glass of water he'd been sipping throughout dinner. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "we see people who remind us of important times in our lives. It can be overwhelming." Lily nodded sagely, as if this explanation made perfect sense to her. Is she someone important? How could he answer that? Charlotte had been everything, his partner, his future, his heart walking around outside his body. And then she'd been nothing, a memory too painful to revisit. A dream that had turned into a nightmare of abandonment and unanswered questions. If what he was beginning to suspect was true, she wasn't nothing. She was the reason Lily existed. She was the woman who had given him the greatest gift of his life, even if she'd done it in a way that had nearly destroyed him. She was, he said finally, a very long time ago. At that moment, as if summoned by their conversation, Charlotte looked directly toward their table. Her gaze swept past them initially, then snapped back with the sudden intensity of recognition. Even from across the restaurant, Ethan could see her face change color draining from her cheeks, her composed posture faltering slightly. She knew him. After 8 years, despite the changes that fatherhood and success had wrought in his appearance, she recognized him immediately. What happened next felt like watching a slow-motion catastrophe. Charlotte's hand went to her throat in a gesture of shock he remembered from their years together. Her lips parted slightly, forming what might have been his name, though no sound carried across the distance between them. She gripped the edge of her table as if she needed physical support to remain upright, and then her gaze shifted to Lily. The moment Charlotte's eyes landed on his daughter, Ethan watched something profound and terrible happen to her face. Recognition flickered there, not the recognition of meeting someone new, but the deeper, more primal recognition of seeing a piece of yourself reflected in another person. Charlotte's hand moved from her throat to cover her mouth, her eyes widening with what looked like wonder and terror combined. She stared at Lily with an intensity that made Ethan's heart pound even harder, because he recognized that look. It was the same expression he'd worn the first time he'd held his daughter, the same awe and protective love that had transformed him from bachelor to father in a single heartbeat. "Daddy," Lily whispered, her voice carrying a note of uncertainty for the first time that evening. "Why is the sad lady looking at me like that?" Before Ethan could formulate an answer, Charlotte stood up abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor, the sound sharp enough to turn heads at nearby tables. For a moment, she stood frozen, her gaze locked on Lily as if she were seeing something impossible made manifest. Then, moving with the mechanical precision of someone operating on autopilot, she reached for her coat and purse. Her movements were jerky, uncoordinated, so different from the fluid grace he remembered. She was running again, just as she had 8 years ago, and the realization sent a spike of anger through his chest. "She's leaving," Lily observed, and there was something almost like disappointment in her voice. Ethan watched Charlotte hurry toward the exit, her heels clicking rapidly against the polished floor. Part of him, the part that had spent years building walls around the wound she'd left, wanted to let her go. Let her run back to whatever life she'd built in his absence. Let her continue to exist in the realm of memory and regret where she'd lived for nearly a decade. But another part of him, the part that was Lily's father, the part that had learned to fight for what mattered, couldn't let this moment pass. Not when his daughter was somehow involved. Not when the questions that had haunted him for 8 years might finally have answers. And there was something else. Something he was only beginning to acknowledge. Lily's instant recognition of Charlotte hadn't been coincidence. His brilliant, intuitive daughter had somehow known, had felt the connection even before seeing her face clearly. That kind of recognition didn't happen between strangers. "Should we say hello?" Lily asked, her notebook forgotten as she watched Charlotte's retreating figure. "She looks like she needs a friend." The innocence of the suggestion broke something loose in Ethan's chest. Here was his daughter, possibly their daughter, offering kindness to a woman she didn't consciously know but had somehow recognized at a cellular level. The poetry of it was almost too much to bear. "You know what, Lil?" he said, signaling Maria for the check with an urgency that surprised him. "I think you're right. I think maybe we should." But as he looked toward the entrance, Charlotte was already gone, disappeared into the Seattle evening like she had from his apartment so many years ago. The only evidence she'd been there at all was the untouched drink sitting on her table and the seismic shift in Ethan's understanding of his own life. "Is she coming back?" Lily asked, pressing her face to the window to peer out at the street. Ethan stared at the empty chair where Charlotte had been sitting, his mind racing through possibilities and implications. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I think—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think this isn't the last time we'll see her." Because now that he'd found her, or she'd found them, he wasn't going to let her disappear again. Not when there were questions that needed answers. Not when there was a little girl who deserved to know the truth about where she came from. Not when his heart, despite 8 years of careful protection, was already remembering what it felt like to beat in rhythm with someone else's. "Maria," Ethan called out, perhaps more urgently than the situation warranted. But urgency was the only gear his mind seemed capable of operating in. The server appeared within seconds, concern flickering across her face at his obvious distress. "Is everything all right, Mr. Green?" "We need to go," he said, pulling out his wallet and laying down bills without counting them, far more than their dinner cost. But precision seemed irrelevant when his entire world was reshaping itself. "Family emergency." Lily looked up at him with wide eyes. "Are we chasing the sad lady?" The question stopped him cold. Sometimes his daughter's perceptiveness felt almost supernatural. "We're going to make sure she's okay," he said, helping her down from the booth and grabbing her coat. "Good," Lily said, slipping her arms into her sleeves. "I think she needs us." They hurried through the restaurant, past surprised diners and the concerned Mater D, bursting through the front door into the crisp Seattle evening. The street was busy with Tuesday night foot traffic. But Ethan spotted Charlotte immediately, her charcoal coat a beacon as she moved quickly down Pine Street, her posture rigid with the kind of control that came from years of practice at not falling apart. In public. There, Lily pointed, bouncing on her toes. She's walking really fast, like she's scared. Ethan took Lily's hand and they followed, maintaining distance but closing the gap steadily. Charlotte moved with purpose but not destination, she kept. Glancing back, checking doorways, the behavior of someone who needed to move but didn't know where to go. At the corner of Pine and 4th, she finally stopped. Ethan watched as she leaned against a lamppost, one hand pressed to her chest as if she couldn't quite catch her breath. Even from 50 feet away, he could see she was shaking. "Daddy," Lily whispered, tugging on his hand. "She's crying." She was right. Charlotte's shoulders had the telltale curve of someone trying to hold back tears, and she kept wiping at her face with trembling fingers. The sight of her pain cut through Ethan's anger like a knife, leaving behind something raw and more complicated. "Wait here," he told Lily, guiding her to a nearby bench. "Just for 1 minute, I need to talk to her. But just 1 minute. Okay? I'll be right there where you can see me." Lily nodded reluctantly, settling onto the bench with her notebook clutched in her lap like a security blanket. Ethan approached Charlotte slowly, the way one might approach a wounded animal, carefully, with hands visible, prepared for flight. "Charlotte." She spun around at the sound of his voice, and he saw her face clearly for the first time in 8 years. She was still beautiful, more beautiful if anything, with the kind of refined elegance that came with success and experience. But there were new lines around her eyes, a fragility in her composure that hadn't been there before. "Ethan." His name came out as barely a whisper. I didn't think. When I saw you in there, I thought I was hallucinating. You ran away." The words came out harsher than he'd intended, carrying 8 years of hurt and confusion. "I had to." Her voice cracked. "I couldn't. Seeing you was hard enough, but she..." Charlotte's gaze moved past him to where Lily sat swinging her legs on the bench, and her face crumpled. "Oh God, Ethan, she has my eyes." The admission hung in the air. Between them like a bridge, neither was sure they were ready to cross. Ethan felt his chest tighten with a mixture of vindication and terror. He'd been right. The impossible thing he'd been afraid to believe was true. "Is she..." He couldn't finish the question. The words were too big, too loaded with potential. To change everything. Charlotte closed her eyes, tears finally spilling over. "Her name is Lily," she whispered. "I named her Lily because you always said if we had a daughter, you'd want to name her after something beautiful and strong." The ground seemed to shift beneath Ethan's feet. "You were pregnant." It wasn't a question. "I found out 2 weeks after I left." Charlotte's voice was so quiet he had to lean closer to hear her. "I was so scared, Ethan. We were so young, and you were just starting your company. And I was terrified of being the thing that held you back from your dreams, so you made that choice for me." The anger was back, hot and immediate. "You decided what I could and couldn't handle. I thought I was protecting you. From what? From being a father? From having a family?" His voice rose, then immediately dropped when he remembered Lily was watching. "Do you have any idea what you took from me?" Charlotte flinched as if he'd struck her. "Everything. I took everything. I know that now." "Then why?" He stopped, forcing himself to breathe, to think past the rage and heartbreak. "What happened to her? How did she end up with my sister?" The question seemed to break something fundamental in Charlotte's composure. She leaned back against the lamppost, her legs looking unsteady. "I tried to raise her myself. For 4 years I tried. But I was a mess, Ethan. I had postpartum depression that I didn't get help for because I was too proud and too scared. I was working 3 jobs just to keep us afloat, and I was failing at all of them." She wiped her nose with the back of her hand, a gesture so unlike the polished woman she appeared to be that it reminded him painfully of the girl he'd once loved. Your sister found me, Charlotte continued. I don't know how, but Sarah tracked me down when Lily was 3. She said she'd been looking for you, found out about the baby through some mutual friends. She came to my apartment and saw. Charlotte's voice broke completely. She saw how I was living, how I was failing. Ethan's mind raced. Sarah had never mentioned any of this. In all their conversations about Lily's placement after the accident, she'd never once suggested that Charlotte was alive, let alone involved. Sarah offered to help, Charlotte whispered. She said she'd take Lily temporarily, just until I could get back on my feet. She promised she'd never tell you where Lily came from unless I gave permission. She said it was my story to tell when I was ready. The pieces were clicking into place with horrible clarity. The car accident was supposed to be temporary. Charlotte's words came out in a rush now, as if a dam had burst. Sarah was only supposed to have her for 6 months while I went to therapy, got a better job, learned how to be the mother Lily deserved. But then ... she gestured helplessly. Sarah died, and suddenly you had custody, and I realized you were giving her everything I never could. A stable home, financial security, love. I would have given her all of that with you, Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. Would you? Charlotte looked up at him, her eyes red-rimmed but searching. Really? If I'd shown up 8 years ago, pregnant and scared and completely unprepared for motherhood, would you have been ready for that? The question hit him like a physical blow because he knew the answer. 8 years ago, he'd been 26 and convinced that success meant 18-hour days and sleeping in his office. He'd been brilliant and driven and completely unprepared for the reality of raising a human being. We could have figured it out together, he said finally. Maybe. Charlotte's smile was sad and wistful, but I was too scared to find out. And by the time I realized what a mistake I'd made, it was too late. You were already her father. She was already yours. From the bench, Lily called out, Daddy, is everything okay? Both Ethan and Charlotte turned toward the sound of her voice, and Ethan watched Charlotte's face transform with wonder and pain as she really looked at their daughter, vibrant, curious, clearly loved and secure in ways Charlotte had never been. Able to provide. She's perfect, Charlotte whispered. She's absolutely perfect. Yes, Ethan said simply. She is. Does she ... does she know about me? She knows her mother died. The lie tasted bitter in his mouth now. I never gave her details because I didn't have any. Charlotte nodded, tears starting fresh. That's probably for the best. No, Ethan said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. It's not. Because you're not dead, Charlotte. You're here. And that little girl has spent 7 years wondering about the mother she never knew. But I'm not her mother, Charlotte said quickly. Not really. I gave birth to her, but you're the one who raised her. You're the one who sang her to sleep and kissed her scraped knees and taught her to be brave and kind. I'm just the woman who wasn't strong enough to stay. Ethan stared at her, seeing clearly for perhaps the first time the depth of her pain, the weight of guilt she'd been carrying. You're her biological mother, he said gently. That matters. It doesn't diminish what we've built together, but it matters. Charlotte looked toward Lily again, her expression hungry and heartbroken. What happens now? Before Ethan could answer, Lily had hopped down from the bench and was walking toward them, her notebook tucked under her arm and her expression determined. Daddy, she said, reaching for his hand and looking up at Charlotte with the frank curiosity of someone half her age. Are you the reason I have these eyes? The directness of the question stunned both adults into silence. Charlotte stared down at this beautiful, confident little girl, their little girl, and Ethan could see the exact moment when the last of her composure crumbled. Yes, Charlotte whispered, kneeling down so she was at Lily's eye level. Yes. Sweetheart, I think I am. And in that moment, with his daughter and the woman he'd never stopped loving, looking at each other with wonder and recognition, Ethan realized that sometimes the truth didn't destroy everything. Sometimes it made everything possible. The three of them stood on the sidewalk in a triangle of uncertainty, the weight of revelation settling around them like snow, beautiful and transformative, but also cold and potentially treacherous. Lily, with the resilience that had always amazed Ethan, was the first to break the silence. "So you're my first mommy," she said to Charlotte, not as a question but as a statement, requiring confirmation. "And Daddy is my always daddy." Charlotte's eyes filled with fresh tears at the simple precision of Lily's categorization. That's one way to put it, yes. Where have you been?" Lily asked, tilting her head with that characteristic gesture Ethan now recognized as purely Charlotte's. "I used to look for you in crowds. Daddy said you were in heaven, but you don't look like an angel." The innocent observation hit Charlotte like a physical blow. She looked to Ethan with something approaching panic, as if she just realized the magnitude of the deception they'd all been living with. "Maybe," Ethan said carefully, "we should find somewhere more private to talk." Charlotte nodded quickly, wiping at her eyes. "There's a coffee shop around the corner, Brewster's. It stays open late and has a quiet back section." As they walked the short distance, Lily positioned herself between the two adults, holding both their hands with the matter-of-fact acceptance that seemed to be her superpower. Ethan noticed how Charlotte's fingers trembled around Lily's small ones, how she kept glancing down at their daughter as if she couldn't quite believe she was real. Brewster's was exactly as Charlotte had described, warm, dimly lit, with worn leather chairs and the kind of ambient noise that provided privacy without isolation. They settled into a corner booth, Lily sliding in next to Charlotte with the fearless curiosity that had defined her since toddlerhood. "Tell me about heaven," Lily said without preamble. "Is it nice there? Do they have good snacks?" Charlotte looked helplessly at Ethan, who found himself in the surreal position of having to navigate the complexity of his daughter's theological questions while processing his own emotional earthquake. "Sweetheart," he said gently, "I think I made a mistake when I told you that. Charlotte, your first mommy, she wasn't in heaven. She was just far away." "Why?" Lily turned to Charlotte with the directness that had always characterized her. "Questions. Did you get lost?" The simplicity of the question seemed to break something open in Charlotte. She covered her face with her hands for a moment, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. When she looked up, her carefully applied makeup was smeared, but her eyes were clearer than they'd been all evening. "Yes," she said simply, "I got very, very lost." And then, as if Lily's straightforward approach had given her permission to be equally direct, Charlotte began to tell her story. Not the sanitized version she might tell a boardroom or a therapist, but the raw, complicated truth. "When you were born," she said, speaking directly to Lily but including Ethan in her gaze, "I was very young and very scared. I had never taken care of a baby before, and I didn't know how to do it right." "Nobody knows how at first," Lily said pragmatically. "That's why babies are very patient while you learn." Charlotte smiled through her tears. "You're absolutely right. But I was too scared to ask for help. I thought if I asked for help, it meant I was a bad mommy." "That's silly," Lily declared. "Daddy asks for help all the time. He asks Mrs. Patterson next door how to braid hair, and he asks Google how to cook things that aren't sandwiches." Ethan felt his chest tighten at this casual revelation of his own learning curve. He'd forgotten that Lily noticed everything, including his struggles to master the basics of single parenthood. "I should have been braver," Charlotte continued. "Like you are, but instead I made some very big mistakes. I thought the best thing for you would be to find someone who knew how to take care of you better than I did. So you found Daddy," Lily said, her logic cutting straight to the heart of things. "Actually, I found Aunt Sarah first. She was Daddy's sister, and she was very good at taking care of people. The plan was for her to help me learn how to be a better mommy, and then I would come back and take care of you myself." Lily frowned, processing this information with the seriousness she brought to all complex problems. But Aunt Sarah went to real heaven. Yes, Charlotte whispered. She did. And by then, you and Daddy had found each other, and I realized that maybe the best thing I could do for you was to let you stay with someone who could give you everything I couldn't. Ethan had been silent through most of this exchange, watching his daughter and Charlotte navigate this impossible conversation with more grace than he felt capable of. But Charlotte's last statement sparked something protective in him. You could have given her love, he said quietly. That's what mattered most. Charlotte turned to him, her expression raw with 8 years of suppressed grief. Could I? Ethan, you didn't see me during those 4 years. I was working at a diner until 2 a.m., then coming home to a studio apartment where Lily slept on a mattress on the floor because I couldn't afford a proper bed. I was so exhausted and overwhelmed that some days I would put her in front of the TV for hours just so I could sit in the bathroom and cry. She paused, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. There were days when I looked at her perfect little face and felt nothing but panic. Not love, not joy, just terror that I was going to ruin her life. What kind of mother feels that way? The kind who's drowning, Ethan said, his anger at her choices beginning to give way to something more complicated. The kind who needed help, but was too proud or scared to ask for it. I went to therapy after Sarah took her, Charlotte continued. Finally, I learned about postpartum depression, about how trauma can affect your ability to bond, about how poverty and isolation can make everything worse. I learned that what I was feeling wasn't unusual or evil, it was treatable. So you got better, Lily said, with the confidence of someone who believed all problems had solutions. I did get better. It took years, but I did. I went back to school, got my degree in social work. I started helping other mothers who were struggling the way I had struggled. I built a life that I was proud of. But you never came back, Ethan said, and he couldn't keep the hurt out of his voice. Charlotte's eyes filled again. How could I? By the time I was healthy enough to be the mother she deserved, you already were. I would call Sarah sometimes, just to hear about how Lily was doing. Sarah would tell me about dance classes and bedtime stories, and the way she laughed when you made pancakes on Sunday mornings. I would listen to these stories and think, this is what love looks like. This is what I could never have given her. When Sarah died, she continued, I flew back for the funeral. I saw you from across the cemetery, holding Lily's hand while she cried for the only mother figure she remembered. You were so gentle with her, so present. I realized that staying away wasn't just about protecting Lily anymore. It was about protecting myself from the reality of what I'd given up. The coffee shop had grown quieter around them as the evening progressed, but their corner felt like its own world, insulated from everything but the truth they were finally sharing. I kept tabs on you both, Charlotte admitted. I know that probably sounds creepy, but I needed to know that she was okay. I would read about your company's success and think, she never won for anything. I saw photos from her school's website when she won the science fair. And I cried for an hour because she looked so confident and happy. Why are you here now? Ethan asked. In Seattle, at our restaurant? Charlotte looked down at her hands. I've been in town for 3 days, working on a case I specialize in. Family reunification now, helping kids who've been separated from their parents. The irony isn't lost on me. She gave a bitter laugh. I kept driving past places we used to go together. You and I Meridian Bistro was where you took me for our 6-month anniversary. I thought maybe if I sat there for a while, I could figure out how to stop feeling like a ghost in my own life. But you didn't expect to see us, Lily said, her young mind putting together the pieces with startling clarity. No, sweetheart, I didn't. I thought you lived in San Francisco still. I had no idea you'd moved to Seattle. We moved here last year, Lily informed her. Daddy said it was because the schools were better. but I think it was because he missed the rain. Charlotte smiled at this, the first genuine smile Ethan had seen from her all evening. He always did love rainy days. He said they were good for thinking. Still do, Ethan said softly, and for a moment, the space between them felt less like an 8-year chasm and more like a conversation they'd paused and were finally ready to resume. So what happens now? Charlotte asked, echoing her earlier question, but with a different weight behind it now that Lily knew the truth. Lily, who had been listening to this entire conversation with the absorbed attention she usually reserved for particularly fascinating nature documentaries, looked between the two adults with something approaching impatience. Now, she said with the authority of someone who had clearly been thinking this through, you stop being lost. The wisdom of a 7-year-old hung in the air between them, simple and profound in the way that only truth could be. Charlotte stared at Lily, their daughter, with something approaching wonder, as if she couldn't quite believe that someone so small could see so clearly through the labyrinth of adult complications they'd constructed around themselves. You make it sound easy, Charlotte said softly, reaching across the table to touch Lily's hand with tentative fingers, as if she were afraid the contact might break some spell. Most things are easy, Lily replied with the matter-of-fact confidence that had been guiding her through life since she could talk. Adults just make them complicated because they think too much instead of feel too much. Ethan found himself smiling despite the emotional chaos of the evening. Did you just make that up, or is that from one of your books? I made it up, Lily said proudly, but it might be true anyway. Sometimes the best things are true even when you don't read them. Anywhere. Charlotte laughed a real laugh, surprising herself with the sound. She's extraordinary, she said to Ethan, her voice filled with amazement and gratitude. You've raised someone truly extraordinary. We've raised someone extraordinary, Ethan corrected gently, and watched Charlotte's face crumple slightly at the generosity of his inclusion. I don't deserve that, she whispered. Maybe not, Ethan said, his honesty tempered with kindness. But she does. She deserves to know that both of her parents think she's extraordinary. Lily, who had been following this exchange with the focused attention she usually reserved for particularly interesting documentaries, suddenly brightened. Can I ask Charlotte some questions? I have a lot of questions about first mommies. Charlotte nodded, though Ethan could see the apprehension in her eyes. Of course, ask me anything. Do I have your hands? Lily held up her small hands, studying them with scientific interest. Charlotte placed her hands next to Lily's, palm to palm. Your fingers are longer, like your daddy's, but yes, I think you have my hands. See how our thumbs curve the same way? And do I have your brain? The question was so unexpected that both adults paused. What do you mean? Charlotte asked. Well, I'm very good at understanding when people are sad even when they're trying to hide it. And I can tell when someone is lying even when they think they're being sneaky. Daddy says I have emotional X-ray vision. Lily tilted her head. Do you have that too? Charlotte's eyes widened. Yes, actually I do. It's part of what made me good at my job, helping families. I can usually tell what someone is really feeling underneath what they're saying. So that's genetic. Lily announced with satisfaction. I wondered about that. What else do we share? For the next 20 minutes, Ethan watched something magical unfold. Charlotte and Lily discovered a dozen tiny connections. They both hummed when they were nervous. Both preferred odd numbers to even ones. Both could wiggle their ears, a demonstration that had Lily dissolving into giggles, and both had an inexplicable fear of butterflies that they couldn't explain. It's like having a biological treasure hunt, Lily declared. Every similarity is like finding buried gold. But it was the differences that seemed to fascinate her even more. Charlotte was left-handed while Lily was right-handed. Charlotte loved spicy food while Lily thought black pepper was too adventurous. Charlotte was afraid of heights while Lily dreamed of becoming a pilot. So I got some of you and some of Daddy, and some that's just me, Lily concluded. That's perfect. Like a recipe, where you mix ingredients but get something completely new. Charlotte wiped at her eyes again, but these tears seemed different, lighter somehow, touched with joy rather than weighted with grief. How are you so wise? She asked Lily. I read a lot, Lily said seriously, and I watch people. And Daddy talks to me like I'm smart instead of like I'm little, so my brain got good exercise. The casual mention of Ethan's parenting philosophy hit Charlotte with unexpected force. She turned to him, her expression soft with recognition. You always said you'd do that. When we used to talk about someday having kids, you said you'd never talk down to them. Down to them. You remember that? Ethan asked, surprised. I remember everything, Charlotte said quietly. Every conversation we had about the future, every dream we shared. That's part of what made leaving so hard. I wasn't just leaving you, I was leaving all the possibilities we'd imagined together. The air between them shifted slightly, becoming charged with the weight of shared history and lost time. But before either of them could navigate the complexity of that moment, Lily spoke up. Were you and Daddy married? She asked Charlotte. No, sweetheart. We were very close friends who loved each other very much. Like boyfriend and girlfriend? Lily's eyes lit up with the romance of the concept. Yes, Charlotte said, glancing at Ethan. Like that. And then you got scared and ran away? The simplicity of Lily's summary was both accurate and devastating. Yes, Charlotte admitted. I got scared and ran away. But you're not scared anymore? Charlotte considered this carefully. I'm still scared, she said honestly. But I'm more scared of staying away than I am of staying now. Good, Lily declared. Being scared is okay if you do the right thing anyway. That's what brave means. Ethan found himself looking at Charlotte with new eyes, not through the lens of his hurt and abandonment, but through Lily's perspective of practical wisdom and second chances. Charlotte had made mistakes, terrible ones that had cost them all years of togetherness. But she had also done something he was beginning to understand required its own kind of courage. She had stayed away when she believed it was better for Lily, even though it was destroying her. I have one more question, Lily announced, her voice taking on the serious tone she used for particularly important inquiries. What is it? Charlotte asked. Are you going to disappear again? The question hung in the air like a challenge, cutting straight to the heart of everything they were all afraid to ask. Charlotte looked at Lily, then at Ethan, then back at Lily. I don't want to, she said carefully. But I also don't want to disrupt the beautiful life you and your daddy have built together. You wouldn't be disrupting, Lily said with characteristic certainty. You'd be adding. Like when Daddy puts chocolate chips in pancakes. The pancakes were already good, but the chocolate chips make them better. Ethan felt his heart stop for a moment. His daughter's ability to distill complex emotional situations into perfect metaphors never ceased to amaze him, but this one felt particularly profound. What do you think, Daddy? Lily asked, turning to him with expectant eyes. Should Charlotte stay and be chocolate chips? The question forced him to confront feelings he'd been avoiding all evening. What did he want? Not what was practical or safe or reasonable, but what did his heart actually want? Looking at Charlotte vulnerable and hopeful, and clearly terrified. Of his answer, he realized he wanted the same thing he'd wanted 8 years ago. He wanted to build a life with her. He wanted to wake up next to her and argue about what to have for dinner and watch her read bedtime stories to their daughter. But he also wanted to protect himself and Lily from the possibility of being abandoned again. He wanted guarantees that didn't exist and promises that couldn't be made. I think, he said slowly, choosing his words with care, that we take this one day at a time. We figure out what it means to be a family in a way that works for everyone. Starting tomorrow? Lily asked hopefully. Charlotte looked at Ethan questioningly, and he found himself nodding. Starting tomorrow. Perfect, Lily said, settling back in her chair with the satisfied air of someone who had successfully solved a complex problem. Now can we have dessert? All this family building is making me hungry. And as Ethan signaled their server and Charlotte laughed at their daughter's priorities, he realized that maybe Lily was right. Maybe the best things in life really were simple, and adults really did overcomplicate them. Maybe love, even complicated love, even love that had been broken and buried and given up for dead, could be as simple as choosing to show up and try. Again, the next morning arrived with the kind of Seattle drizzle that made everything look soft around the edges, as if the world itself was being gentle with new possibilities. Ethan stood at his kitchen window, watching Lily build elaborate obstacle courses for her stuffed animals in the backyard, her rain boots splashing through puddles with determined joy. His phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. "Still okay if I come by around 10? I brought coffee and possibly too many pastries from that place on Capitol Hill you used to love." The casual mention of their shared history felt like a small miracle, not painful anymore, but precious. He texted back, "Lily's been awake since 6 planning activities for you. Fair warning, she's made a schedule." When Charlotte arrived, she looked different than she had the night before. Gone was the polished professional armor. Instead, she wore jeans and a soft blue sweater, her hair in a ponytail that made her look closer to the woman he'd once known. She carried a bakery box and 2 coffee cups, and her smile was nervous but genuine. "Good morning," she said, and the simple greeting felt loaded with significance. "Morning," Ethan replied, stepping aside to let her in. "Lily's in the backyard, but I should warn you, she's been planning your entire day." As if summoned by his words, Lily burst through the back door, still wearing her pajamas under her raincoat. "Charlotte, you came! I have 7 things we need to do today, but we can do them in any order you want because flexibility is important in friendship." Charlotte laughed, setting down the coffee and pastries. 7 things? That sounds ambitious. What's first on the list? "Well," Lily said, consulting a piece of paper covered in her careful handwriting, "first we need to see my room so you know where I live. Then we need to cook something together, because that's how you learn if someone is a good kitchen partner. Then we need to look at my photo albums so you can see what you missed, but not in a sad way, just in a catching up way." Ethan watched Charlotte's face as Lily outlined her agenda, noting how she hung on every word with the attention of someone trying to memorize precious details. "That sounds perfect," Charlotte said. "Lead the way." The house tour was a revelation. Lily narrated their lives through the spaces they occupied, showing Charlotte the reading nook where Ethan read to her every night, the kitchen island where they did homework together, the wall of photos documenting 3 years of father-daughter adventures. "This is my favorite picture," Lily said, pointing to a candid shot of her and Ethan at a pumpkin patch, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. "Daddy was trying to carry 6 pumpkins at once, and he dropped them all. I told him he should make 2 trips, but he said that wasn't how adventure worked." Charlotte studied the photo with intense focus. "You both look so happy." "We are happy," Lily said simply. "But happy can get bigger, like when you put a bigger bowl under a growing plant." The cooking project was making pancakes Lily's specialty, which apparently involved measuring ingredients by handfuls and adding secret ingredients that seemed to change based on mood. Charlotte proved to be a surprisingly good kitchen partner, following Lily's somewhat chaotic instructions with patience and enthusiasm. "Daddy usually makes them more round," Lily observed as Charlotte flipped a distinctly oval pancake. "I was never very good at perfect circles," Charlotte admitted. "But sometimes imperfect shapes taste better because they're more interesting." "That's true," Lily said approvingly. "Perfect is boring anyway." Ethan found himself watching their interactions with fascination and growing warmth. Charlotte seemed to understand instinctively how to engage with Lily, not talking down to her, but not treating her like a miniature adult either. She listened to Lily's stories about school and friends with genuine interest, asked thoughtful questions, and shared appropriate pieces of her own life in return. But it was during the photo album session that things became more complicated. Lily had compiled 3 albums documenting her life with Ethan birthday parties, holidays, everyday moments that had seemed ordinary at the time, but now felt precious and significant. Charlotte sat on the living room floor, turning pages with reverent attention, occasionally asking questions or commenting on how much Lily had grown. "This was my first day of school," Lily explained, pointing to a photo of herself in a purple dress, holding Ethan's hand and grinning at the camera. "Daddy was more nervous than I was. He packed 17 snacks in my lunchbox." Charlotte's smile faltered slightly. "You were so brave." "I was terrified on my first day of school. Were you scared when I started school?" Lily asked with her characteristic directness. The question hung in the air like a landmine. Charlotte's hands stilled on the album pages, and Ethan could see her struggling with how to answer honestly without causing pain. "I was," Charlotte said quietly. "But I was also proud. I knew you were ready for it, even if I wasn't ready to see pictures of you growing up without me there." "You could have been there," Lily said, not accusingly but with the logical clarity that sometimes cut deeper than anger. "If you had wanted to." Charlotte closed her eyes briefly. "It's complicated, sweetheart. Sometimes adults make choices that seem right at the time but hurt people anyway. Like when I decided not to tell Daddy about breaking his favorite mug." Lily asked. "I thought I was protecting his feelings, but really I was just being scared." The parallel was so precise it took Ethan's breath away. He watched Charlotte absorb the gentle wisdom of their daughter's observation, seeing herself reflected in a 7-year-old's mistake. "Yes," Charlotte whispered. "Exactly like that." The Tufindi afternoon proceeded smoothly until they reached the final album, the one that contained photos from the past year, including pictures from Ethan's company events where he'd been photographed with various colleagues, and, occasionally, dates. "That's Amanda," Lily said casually, pointing to a photo of Ethan with an attractive brunette at what appeared to be a charity gala. "Daddy went to dinner with her 4 times, but then he said they weren't compatible because she didn't like board games." Ethan felt heat rise in his cheeks. He'd forgotten that photo was in there, forgotten that his dating life over the past 3 years was documented in the same albums that chronicled Lily's growing up. Charlotte stared at the photo longer than the others, and when she looked up, her expression was carefully neutral in a way that reminded him painfully of the walls she used to build when she felt threatened. "She's very pretty," Charlotte said quietly. "Daddy said she was nice but not interesting," Lily reported with the brutal honesty of someone too young to understand the complexity of adult feelings. "He said interesting was more important than pretty." The comment was meant to be reassuring, but Ethan could see it had the opposite effect on Charlotte. She turned the page quickly, as if trying to move past the evidence of his life continuing without her. The rest of the afternoon felt different still. Warm, still connected, but with an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there before. Charlotte became more careful in her responses, more observant of the family rhythms. She was stepping into rather than helping to create. When evening approached, and it was time for her to leave, the goodbyes felt strained in a way the morning's hellos hadn't. "Thank you for today," Charlotte said to Lily, kneeling down for a hug that lasted longer than necessary. "It was the best day I've had in a very long time. Will you come back tomorrow?" Lily asked. Charlotte glanced at Ethan, uncertainty flickering across her face. "If that's okay with everyone." "Of course," Ethan said, but he could hear the formality creeping back into his own voice. After Charlotte left, Lily looked at him with the perceptive gaze that always made him feel like she could see straight through to his thoughts. "She got scared again," Lily observed. "When she saw the picture of you with Amanda." "Maybe a little," Ethan admitted. "Are you going to let her stay scared, or are you going to fix it?" The question hit him like a challenge. Because Lily was right, Charlotte had retreated the moment she'd been reminded that his life had moved forward without her, that there had been other women, other possibilities. And instead of addressing it, he'd let the awkwardness build. "What do you think I should do?" he asked his daughter. "Tell her the truth," Lily said with the confidence of someone who believed all problems had simple solutions. "Tell her that none of those other ladies mattered because your heart was still waiting for her." The wisdom of 7-year-olds, Ethan thought, was sometimes terrifyingly accurate. "Is that what you think happened?" he asked. "That my heart was waiting?" Lily tilted her head, considering. "I think your heart was waiting, but your brain didn't know it yet. Sometimes hearts are smarter than brains about love things." That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan sat in his living room looking at the albums they'd shared with Charlotte, seeing his life through her eyes. 3 years of birthdays and school, plays and everyday moments that had built a complete world, a world that had no room for her in it, no space for the woman who had given them the most precious gift imaginable. He realized that if they were going to make this work, it wouldn't be enough for Charlotte to fit into the life he and Lily had built. They would need to build something new together, something that honored what they'd created, separately while making room for what they could become together. The question was whether Charlotte would be brave enough to try, and whether he would be generous enough to let her. Charlotte didn't come the next day, or the day after. By Thursday, Lily's carefully organized schedule for Charlotte time had become a source of quiet disappointment that she tried to hide behind extra enthusiasm for other activities. She threw herself into a complex art project involving pipe cleaners and too much glitter, built increasingly elaborate fairy houses in the backyard, and asked Ethan to read her 3 stories instead of their usual one at bedtime. "Maybe Charlotte is busy with work," Lily said on Thursday evening, her voice carefully neutral as she arranged her stuffed animals in precise rows on her bed. "Important people probably have very busy schedules." Ethan's heart broke a little at his daughter's attempt to rationalize Charlotte's absence. "Maybe," he agreed. "But maybe she's just scared again. When people get scared, sometimes they need help remembering that brave is better than safe," Lily observed, then fixed him with a look that was far too knowing for someone her age. "Are you going to help her remember?" That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan found himself walking past Brewster's coffee shop, then past the hotel where Charlotte had mentioned she was staying. He didn't have a plan exactly, but Lily's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes people need help remembering that brave is better than safe. He found her in the hotel's small business center at nearly 10 o'clock, hunched over a laptop with the focused intensity of someone trying to lose themselves in work. She looked smaller somehow, wrapped in an oversized cardigan, her hair falling in front of her face as she typed. "Working late?" he asked softly, not wanting to startle her. Charlotte looked up, and he could see the surprise and relief and fear chase across her face in quick succession. "Ethan, yes, just finishing up some case notes. Mind if I sit?" She gestured to the chair across from her, closing her laptop with nervous fingers. "How did you find me? Lucky guess. You always used to work late when you were avoiding something difficult." Charlotte's smile was rueful. "Some things don't change." "And some things do," Ethan said gently. "You can't keep running every time things get complicated, Charlotte." "Not this time." "I'm not running," she said quickly, then caught herself. "Okay, I'm running." "But Ethan, seeing those photos, seeing how complete your life is with Lily, I realized I don't have a place in that. I'm not part of the story you've built together." "You're right," Ethan said, and watched her face fall. "You're not part of the story we've built. You're the reason the story exists at all." Charlotte blinked, as if the words didn't compute. "What do you mean?" Ethan leaned forward, choosing his words carefully. "Do you want to know why none of those relationships worked? Why Amanda was nice but not interesting? Why Sarah was smart but not engaging? Why I kept finding reasons why perfectly wonderful women weren't quite right. Charlotte nodded, her eyes wide and vulnerable. Because they weren't you, Ethan said simply. For 8 years, I told myself I was moving on, building a new life, being a responsible single father, and I was doing all those things. But I was also measuring every woman I met against a standard. They could never meet, because the standard was a ghost. I'm not a ghost, Charlotte whispered. No, you're not. You're here, and you're real, and you're Lily's mother. But more than that, he paused, his heart pounding. You're the woman I never stopped loving. The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they were ready to cross. Charlotte stared at him, tears gathering in her eyes. Ethan, I can't. I don't deserve. Stop, he said firmly. Stop deciding what you deserve. Start deciding what you want. I want to stay, she said in a rush, as if the words had been fighting to escape. I want to be part of your lives, part of Lily's growing up. I want to make pancakes that aren't perfectly round and listen to her questions about octopuses and butterflies. I want to. She paused, her voice breaking slightly. I want to fall asleep knowing that when I wake up, I won't have to wonder what she's doing or whether she's happy or if she ever thinks about me. Then stay, Ethan said. But what about your life here? Your routines, your traditions? The perfect little world you've built with her? Ethan smiled. Charlotte, that world has had a Charlotte-shaped hole in it since the day she was born. We just didn't realize it until Tuesday night. Before Charlotte could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, then showed him the screen. It was from Lily, sent from Ethan's phone. Hi, Charlotte. Daddy doesn't know I'm texting you, but I wanted you to know that our pancakes this morning were very round and very boring. Also, Mr. Whiskers, my stuffed cat, keeps asking when you're coming back. Also, I miss you. Love, Lily. P.S. Daddy misses you too, but he's too grown up to say so in a text. Charlotte laughed through her tears. She's something else. She gets that from both of us, Ethan said. The determination from you, the complete inability to mind her own business from me. What happens now? Charlotte asked, echoing the question that had become their refrain. Now we stop trying to fit you into our existing life and start building a new one together. All three of us. Charlotte looked at him searchingly. What does that look like? Ethan pulled out his phone and opened his calendar app. It looks like you moving here permanently. It looks like Lily having a bedroom at your place and you having space in ours. It looks like us figuring out how to co-parent someone who's already 7 years old and has very strong opinions about how family should work. And what about us? Charlotte asked quietly. What does it look like for us? The question was loaded with 8 years of history and hurt, but also with possibility. Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. It looks like starting over, he said. Like dating again, but with a 7-year-old chaperone who will absolutely have opinions about our relationship. It looks like going slow and being honest, and not pretending that love is enough if we don't also do the work. That sounds terrifying, Charlotte said. It is terrifying, Ethan agreed. But you know what's more terrifying? Looking back in another 8 years and realizing we were too scared to try. Charlotte was quiet for a long moment, staring at their joined hands. When she looked up, her expression was different, clearer, more determined. I have one condition, she said. What's that? If I'm going to do this, if I'm going to stay and build something with you and Lily, I need you to promise me something. If I start to run again, if I get scared and try to disappear, don't let me go. Fight for this. Fight for us. The request hit him with unexpected force. It was an acknowledgement of her own patterns, a plea for accountability, and a promise wrapped in vulnerability. Deal, he said. But I have a condition too. What? If you're going to stay, you have to really stay. Not just physically, but emotionally. No more walls, no more protecting yourself by keeping distance. If we're doing this, We're all in. Charlotte nodded, her grip on his hand tightening. All in. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of their decision settling around them. Then Charlotte's phone buzzed again with another message from Lily. Did you say yes yet? Mr. Whiskers is getting impatient. They both laughed, and Ethan realized that this was what he'd been missing, not just Charlotte, but the possibility of sharing moments like this, of having someone who understood Lily's particular brand of wisdom and mischief. I should probably get back, Ethan said, before she figures out how to hack into the hotel's phone system to call you directly. She would absolutely do that, Charlotte said, standing up and gathering her things. Give me until tomorrow to arrange things with work, and then ... double quotes, she paused, looking suddenly uncertain again. And then I'll come home. The word home hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. Home wasn't just a place. It was a choice, a decision to stop running and start building. We'll be waiting, Ethan said simply. As they walked through the hotel lobby together, Charlotte caught sight of their reflection in the mirrored elevator doors, two people who had found their way back to each other against impossible odds, preparing to write a new chapter in the story they'd thought was finished. Ethan? She said as they reached the hotel entrance. Yeah, thank you for not giving up on us. Even when I gave up on myself. He kissed her forehead gently, a gesture of affection and promise. Thank you for coming back. Even when it was the hardest thing you'd ever done. Tomorrow, they would begin the complicated work of becoming a family. Tonight, for the first time in 8 years, they both went to sleep knowing that love, complicated and messy and fragile as it was, had one. Friday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine, the kind of clear Seattle day that felt like a gift from the universe. Ethan was making coffee when his phone rang, Charlotte's name on the caller ID, sending his heart into an irregular rhythm that reminded him how much could still go wrong. Morning, he answered, trying to keep his voice steady. Ethan. Charlotte's voice was tight with stress. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you respond, okay? Ice formed in his stomach. Okay. My supervisor called this morning. There's been a development in the case I've been working on, the family reunification I mentioned. The biological parents want me to stay on through the final hearings, which could take another 6 months. It's a complicated case, and they specifically requested me because... She paused, her voice catching. Because I understand what it's like to be separated from your own family. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of disappointment settle on his chest. Charlotte, wait, let me finish. They're offering me a promotion to manage the entire Northwest Division if I take this case. It would mean more money, more influence, the ability to help hundreds of families instead of just one case at a time. It's everything I've worked toward. For the past 5 years. The silence stretched between them, heavy with implication. Ethan could hear the conflict in her voice, the pull of professional accomplishment warring with personal desire. And, he asked quietly, and I told them no. The words hit him like a physical force. You what? I told them no, Charlotte repeated, her voice growing stronger. I told them that I've spent 8 years putting work before family, and I'm done. I told them I have a daughter who needs her mother, and a man who ... double quotes, she paused. A man who's willing to give me a second chance I don't deserve but desperately want. Relief flooded through him so intensely he had to sit down. Charlotte, are you sure? This sounds like it could be huge for your career. It could be. But you know what would be huge for my life? Watching Lily lose her first tooth. Teaching her to ride a bike. Being there when she has nightmares or gets her heart broken or discovers something amazing. Meeting with her teachers, arguing with you about bedtimes, making terrible pancakes every Sunday morning. Her voice broke slightly on the last words. And Ethan could hear years of longing compressed into that simple list of ordinary moments. The promotion will come around again, Charlotte continued. But Lily is 7 years old right now today, and I've already missed 4 years of 7-year-olds. I don't want to miss any more. Before Ethan could respond, he heard Lily's voice in the background. She must have answered Charlotte's hotel room door. "Hi, Lily," he heard Charlotte say, her voice brightening immediately. "Yes, I was just talking to your daddy. Actually, I have something to ask you both." "Put me on speaker," Ethan said. A moment later, Lily's voice came through clearly. "Daddy, Charlotte has a question for us." "What's the question?" Ethan asked, though his heart was already racing with anticipation. "Well," Charlotte said, and he could hear the nervous excitement in her voice, "I was wondering if you two would like to help me find an apartment here in Seattle. Somewhere close enough that Lily could walk to my place when she wants to, but far enough that you don't get sick of seeing me every day." "Yes," Lily's response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Can it have a window seat?" "I've always wanted to live somewhere with a window seat." "I think we can arrange that," Charlotte said, laughing. And Lily continued with the focus of someone who had clearly been thinking about this. "Can you get a guest room for when I want to have sleepovers? And maybe a really good kitchen, because I want to teach you how to make cookies that don't look like abstract art." "All of that sounds perfect," Charlotte said. "What do you think, Ethan?" The question carried weight beyond apartment hunting. She was asking if he was ready for this, for the reality of shared custody, for Charlotte becoming a permanent fixture in their daily lives, for the complicated dance of co-parenting with someone he was still learning to trust again. "I think," Ethan said slowly, "that we should probably start looking this weekend." The sound of Lily's celebration was audible even through the phone, and Ethan found himself smiling despite the lingering nervousness in his chest. But then Charlotte's tone shifted, becoming more serious. "There's something else. Something I need to tell you both, and it's hard." Ethan's stomach tightened again. "What is it?" "I've been in therapy for the past 3 years, Charlotte said. "Working through the postpartum depression, the fear, the patterns that made me run instead of stay. And my therapist ... She thinks I should tell Lily the whole truth. About why I left, about the depression, about how scared I was. She thinks Lily deserves to understand that it wasn't about her, that it was about me not being well enough to be the mother she needed." The request hung in the air, complex and frightening. Ethan looked across the kitchen toward the backyard where Lily often played, imagining his brilliant, sensitive daughter trying to process the reality of mental illness and abandonment. "That's a big conversation for a 7-year-old, he said. "Carefully, I know. But she's already asking questions about why I left, and I don't want to lie to her anymore. I want her to know that sometimes adults get sick in ways that make it hard to think clearly, but that doesn't mean the love isn't real." From the phone, Lily's voice piped up. "Are you talking about the thing where your brain gets sad and scared, even when everything looks okay?" Both adults fell silent. "Lily, what do you know about that?" Ethan asked. "Tommy's mom has that," Lily said matter-of-factly. "She takes medicine for it and talks to a special doctor, and Tommy says some days are harder than others, but it doesn't mean she loves him less. It just means her brain needs extra help sometimes." The casual wisdom of a 7-year-old perspective on mental health stopped both adults in their tracks. Charlotte's voice was thick with tears when she spoke again. "Would it be okay if I explained to you how my brain was having trouble when you were little? How it made me think things that weren't true, like thinking you'd be better off without me." "Yes," Lily said without hesitation. "I think secrets make families wobbly. Truth makes them stronger, even when truth is hard." Ethan felt something settle in his chest, not the weight of worry, but the solid foundation of trust. His daughter's emotional intelligence continued to amaze him, but more than that, Charlotte's willingness to be vulnerable and honest felt like the final piece of a puzzle clicking into place. "When do you want to have this conversation?" he asked. "Soon," Charlotte said. "Maybe this weekend when we're looking at apartments." We can make it part of the bigger conversation about what our family is going to look like going forward. Our family, Ethan repeated, testing the words. Our family, Charlotte confirmed. If that's what you both want, it's what I want, Lily announced. I've been waiting my whole life for a complete family, and now I finally get one. Later that evening, after Charlotte had returned to her hotel to pack up her temporary life in preparation for creating a permanent one, Ethan sat on Lily's bed for their nightly reading ritual. Daddy, Lily said, settling against his shoulder with her favorite book, are you scared about Charlotte staying? A little, Ethan admitted. Big changes are always a little scary, even when they're good changes. But you're more excited then. Scared? Ethan considered this carefully. Yes, I'm more excited than scared. Good, Lily said with satisfaction. Because tomorrow we get to start being a real family instead of just dreaming about it. As Ethan read to his daughter about brave princesses and magical kingdoms, he realized that sometimes the most extraordinary transformations began with the simplest choice, the choice to stay instead of run, to trust instead of fear, to believe that love was worth the risk of heartbreak. Tomorrow, they would begin writing a new story, not the one he'd planned 8 years ago, and not the one he'd built as a single father, but something entirely new. Something that honored the past, while embracing the future, something that looked exactly like the family they'd all been waiting for. 6 months later, the Tuesday evening routine at Meridian Bistro had evolved in ways that would have seemed impossible on that first night when everything changed. Jeffrey, the mater d', now greeted them as the Green family party of 3, and Table 7 had officially become their table, with a small reserved sign that appeared every Tuesday at 6 p.m. But tonight felt different, special. Lily had insisted on wearing her best dress, navy blue with small white flowers, the same one she'd worn 6 months ago, and had spent the afternoon making what she called celebration cards for reasons she refused to explain. It's a surprise, she kept saying whenever Charlotte or Ethan asked about the carefully folded papers in her small purse. You'll understand when it's time. Charlotte sat in what had once been the wrong seat, though now it was simply hers. The transformation in her was remarkable, not just the obvious changes like the Seattle apartment with the window seat Lily had requested, or the family photos that now included all 3 of them scattered throughout both homes. It was deeper than that. The careful composure she'd worn like armor had softened into something more genuine, more present. Question time, Lily announced, pulling out her notebook with the ceremonial importance of someone conducting official business. I have 3 questions tonight, but they're special questions. Special how? Ethan asked, settling into his seat with the easy familiarity of someone whose Tuesday nights had found their perfect rhythm. Because tonight marks 6 months since we became a real family, Lily declared. So these are anniversary questions. Charlotte's eyes widened. You've been counting? Of course I've been counting, Lily said with the matter-of-fact tone she used when adults asked obvious questions. Important things deserve to be counted. She opened to a page that was different from her usual question lists. This one was decorated with drawings of the 3 of them, complete with Charlotte's apartment building and Ethan's house connected by a rainbow that Lily had labeled the Love Bridge. Question 1, Lily began formally, is for Charlotte. What's the best thing about not being lost anymore? Charlotte's breath caught slightly, a reaction that still happens sometimes when Lily's questions cut straight to the heart of things. She considered the question seriously, the way she'd learned to do with all of Lily's inquiries. The best thing, Charlotte said slowly, is that I get to know you. Not just imagine you or wonder about you from far away, but actually know you. Like how you hum when you're concentrating, and how you always eat the marshmallows out of your hot chocolate. First, and how you think about things in ways that make me see the world differently. Lily beamed with satisfaction. Question 2 is for Daddy. What's different about being happy now versus being happy before? Ethan paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. The question was more complex than it appeared, touching on the difference between contentment and joy, between managing alone and thriving together. Before, he said carefully, I was happy like someone who had learned to be grateful for what they had. But now I'm happy like someone who gets to share everything with the people they love most. It's the difference between a good song you listen to alone and a good song you get to sing with other people. Perfect answer, Lily declared, making a note in her notebook. Question 3 is for all of us, but I think I already know what the answer is. She paused dramatically, clearly enjoying the anticipation she was building. The question is, are we ready for the next big adventure? Before either adult could ask what she meant, Lily reached into her purse and pulled out the celebration cards she'd been working on all afternoon. She handed one to Charlotte and one to Ethan, then sat back with barely contained excitement. Charlotte opened hers first. Inside, in Lily's careful handwriting, was a drawing of 3 stick figures standing in front of a house. Above it, she'd written, Charlotte, will you officially be my other parent? Check yes or no. Ethan's card contained a similar drawing, but his message read, Daddy, will you marry Charlotte so we can all have the same last name and she can be my mom for real? Check yes or no. P.S. I already asked her and she said yes, but only if you wanted to. The restaurant seemed to fade around them as both adults processed what had just happened. Lily had, in her characteristically direct way, just orchestrated a proposal. Lily, Charlotte said, her voice shaky with laughter and tears. Did you just... I've been thinking about it for weeks, Lily interrupted. You both love each other. Don't even try to deny it. It's very obvious, and you both love me, and I love both of you. So it seems silly to keep pretending we're not already a family when we could just make it official. Ethan stared at his card, then at Charlotte, then at their daughter who was watching them both with the expectant air of someone who had solved a puzzle and was waiting for the adults to catch up. There's something you should know, Charlotte said to Lily, reaching across the table to take her hand. Daddy and I have been talking about this. Not the proposal part, that was all you, but about making our family official. And we wanted to ask you how you'd feel about me adopting you legally, so that I'm not just your first mommy, but your actual, legal, forever mommy. Lily's eyes went wide. Like, so no one could ever take me away from you again? Like, so we're connected in every way possible, Charlotte confirmed. Heart, home, and legally. And you'd really want to marry Charlotte? Lily asked Ethan. Even though she makes weird-shaped pancakes and she's afraid of butterflies? Ethan looked at Charlotte, really looked at her. The woman who had given him the greatest gift of his life, who had found the courage to come back when it mattered most, who had chosen them over everything else she could have had. Especially because she makes weird-shaped pancakes and she's afraid of butterflies. Said softly, I want to marry her because she's brave enough to stay when staying is scary, and because she asks you questions like you're the smartest person in the world, and because when she looks at us, her whole face lights up like we're exactly what she's been waiting for her entire life. And what about you? Lily asked Charlotte. Do you want to marry Daddy even though he burns toast and he thinks vegetables are a food group? Charlotte laughed, tears streaming down her face. I want to marry him because he raised you to be kind and brilliant and brave. Because he never gave up on us, even when I gave up on myself. Because when I look at the life you two built together, I don't see a place I need to fit into. I see a home that was always waiting for me to be strong enough to claim it. So is that a yes? Lily asked with barely contained excitement. That's a yes, Charlotte and Ethan said simultaneously, and Lily let out a cheer that made half the restaurant turn to look at them with indulgent smiles. Jeffrey, Lily called. Across the restaurant, we're getting married. All 3 of us. Well, not all 3 of us married to each other. That would be weird. But we're becoming an official family. The Mater D approached with a grin and a bottle of sparkling cider that he produced as if he'd been expecting this exact moment. "Congratulations to the Green family," he said formally, then winked at Lily. "I had a feeling this was coming." Young ladies with notebooks and celebration cards are usually planning something big. As they toasted their future with sparkling cider and Lily's infectious joy, Ethan realized that this was what happiness looked like. Not the absence of fear or struggle, but the presence of people worth fighting for. Love that was strong enough to survive mistakes and brave enough to try again. 1 year later, the framed photo on the mantel captured a moment that would have seemed impossible. Just 18 months earlier, Charlotte in a simple white dress, Ethan in a navy suit, and Lily between them in lavender, all three of them laughing at something she'd whispered during the ceremony. The caption, written in Lily's careful handwriting, read, "The day we made it official." But it was the photo next to it that told the real story, a candid shot from their Tuesday dinner at Meridian Bistro the week before the wedding. Three people sharing a meal, completely absorbed in each other's company, their love evident in every gesture and glance. Sometimes, the most extraordinary love stories began with the simplest recognition, a daughter pointing across a crowded restaurant and saying, "Look at her." Sometimes families weren't born, they were discovered. And sometimes, the greatest adventures began with the courage to stop running and start believing that some things, some people, were worth every risk. If you've stayed with us through this incredible journey of second chances and unexpected family reunions, we'd love to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a moment that changed everything? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more tales that remind us that love, patience, and the wisdom of those we care about can transform even the most broken situations into something beautiful. Because sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to say, "Look at her," and everything you thought you knew about your life can change forever. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.